Memorable NPCs can be tricky. This is a bit of DMing advice slash just general thoughts. A lot of times, if you have an NPC, particularly one that you've planned ahead, you have a specific goal for that NPC to achieve, a purpose for it to exist in the game, and you probably have an idea of what sort of personality this guy has, what sort of voice to use, and that's cool, and that's a big part of your prep, right? But a lot of times you also have these sort of random NPCs you didn't plan for that the party is going to be interacting with. Whether it is, the shopkeeper and you didn't know that they were going to go to a store, or, they want to question some random person on the street about something. You didn't know that they were going to do that. And so you have to come up with something on the fly. So we're talking about off-the-cuff NPC creation. Now, you don't generally need stats for these characters. On the rare occasion that you need to set a DC or have them make a check, it's exceedingly uncommon. You basically have two choices. Either just come up with a reasonable number and use that, or just decide whether they succeed or fail. It's not that big a deal. If the NPC was important and their stats mattered, you would have come up with it already. By definition, these are not important characters. Another thing could be NPC enemies that have lines of dialogue. Either the party is listening in on them from a hidden position, or there's chatter during a fight. And it's cool if you can make these characters memorable. And there's a few specific techniques to do that. This is something that I sort of developed while I was listening to the Adventure Zone podcast and while I was watching shows on Dimension 20. When I realized what they were doing, and I started doing it in my own game, and I found that it really works, and it really enriches the play experience. So here's what you do. You don't come up with a whole backstory. You don't even necessarily need to do an accent, but you need to have a personality type in your mind. And I would really encourage you, don't be afraid to have it be really wacky characters. D&D and other RPGs are about having fun. And so having sort of off-the-wall characters, even in a serious campaign, having these sort of cartoonish type character archetypes pop up can really help alleviate some stress if you're running a stressful campaign, or it can really create a moment of levity and connection with the players that you can all laugh about later. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? So there's some talk out there about how you shouldn't do accents. Particularly accents for cultures that actually exist, because it could be offensive to them, cultural appropriation. Now, I'm a white guy, so I don't have anything to say on that. If you think it would be inappropriate, then don't. If you don't think it'd be inappropriate, then who cares? It's your gaming group. Talk about what's appropriate for you guys. I personally try not to really lean into accents, but I do voices. I said do. So character voices don't necessarily mean accents. You've got pitch, you've got you've got methods of speech, you've got little mannerisms that you can throw in there. I will give you an example of what I'm talking about. I was running my D&D game this last Sunday, and I came up with, I was just sort of on the fly. The party was listening in to some bandits to see if these are the ones that they're looking for. And I came up with, there's the gruff bandit. We're talking about this. The voice comes down real low, gets kind of gravelly. And then they were talking to a sort of what I decided was going to be the young, naive bandit. Oh, no, what do we do with all this stuff? Why did the boss make us capture a bunch of useless, valuable magic items? You know, it's a comedy campaign, so like that was an actual line of dialogue, and so uh, so those are like two instant characters. The rugged, gruff, experienced bandit. He ain't gonna back down. He's gonna face the enemy head on. And the guy who maybe isn't as experienced and is a little easier to cow, that they didn't kill that guy because they wanted to keep him. It's hilarious. They never did find out his name because they immediately decided his name is Meat Shield, and he capitulated to that instantly. So what I'm getting at is you can create memorable, rich NPCs without having to have stats, without having to plan ahead. You don't even have to do accents. But the way I do it is I basically come up with almost like a cartoon voice. Like, think about the kinds of voices you hear in cartoons. They are, what's the word? They are extreme. They are, they're overemphasizing specific traits, like on purpose, so that those traits really are pushed to the foreground, and that's what grabs your attention, and that sort of informs what the characters are. They're overblown. And so if you do that with NPCs, and you don't even have to do it that hard, do it like for the gruff guy, you could have just a little bit of a lower tone without having to go full like a cartoon character. There's different degrees. So this is what I'm getting at right here. There's the bottom line. Creating new characters on the fly, just as you need them, is really fun. These characters are going to stick in the players' minds if you do something to make them memorable. And so having someone who just talks in your normal tone, maybe a little bit slower, enunciate a little bit, or someone who is, talking like this with a slightly different accent. Maybe, is this a real accent? I don't know. I'm just talking slightly differently. It's fine. It's fine. And that's a good way to sort of distinguish between characters. If you have like multiple NPCs in a scene, and you can distinguish between who is talking by doing that. But I would encourage DMs to burp in the middle of a sentence. I would encourage DMs to take it a step further and make characters that are a little bit more off the wall and a little bit more extreme in the way that, in their mannerisms, and the way that they speak and the way that they act. And not to be afraid, because there's a tendency for DMs to try to make their campaigns too serious. And admittedly, I am running a comedy campaign, and so that's not even a consideration. But I do this in more serious games as well. I've done it a couple of times in my Legend of the Five Rings campaign, which is very dramatic and it is quite serious. So and it still works there, as long as you have like the tone of the scene correct. Not every scene needs to be dire. Yeah, so I think a lot of people would be better served by letting go of this idea that every NPC needs to be serious, that every NPC needs to be like sort of baseline, needs to be as serious as the campaign as a whole is. Having funny NPCs that maybe you don't even know they're funny, and say things like have them say things that are slightly ridiculous, just slightly ridiculous, so that the players are encouraged to dig into that. Like, oh, that was a really weird thing you just said. Let's dive into that a minute and explore that part of the world that we are now generating together. And we're doing this sort of cooperative world building because of this thing you said that you thought would be slightly funny. And they're like, that's interesting. Let's learn more about that. and I found that I've done a lot of world building and a lot of just like really magical moments that come out of just saying ridiculous things to try to make my players laugh. And by creating characters that are just ridiculous, just ridiculous enough, you know. So yeah, I guess like I'm not building to any kind of grand point. It's just a bit of DMing advice. Yeah, if you want NPCs, don't be afraid to make your NPCs a little wacky.